Welcome to the second week lecture on mercantilism to Adam Smith as part of the NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism theory and empirics. Myself Dr. Pratap C. Mohanty as a faculty member in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. So, I hope you guys could able to infer what we have been trying to actually proceed to follow each and every bits and pieces of the strategic trade through theories. This is the second week, second lecture, and this week is purely targeted on deriving many facts, figures, issues from the classical economist, namely Adam Smith and David Ricardo, where the classical economics and their views, economists and their views have largely been engaged in explaining the trade based on certain extent of specialization. So, now let me proceed further. We have already discussed mercantilism in the last lecture. In the mercantilism, as a reminder or as a recapitulation to the earlier lectures, mercantilism is purely based on zero sum game, and they believe under mercantilism, physiocrats suggest that they are the thinkers of mercantilism. They suggest that the country would prosper or could prosper if and only if we have a higher exports than imports. They are against imports. They also restricted their sea or ports for others to enter. There are lots of hindrances during mercantilism period, especially if you count state intervention. It was in fact very huge. They believe on nationalism, concept of nationalism or statehood, but in reality which is counteracted by other countries, retaliated by other countries. Therefore, the dimension by which one country starts may not be sustainable to other countries. So, mercantilism actually over the time highly criticized. So, now let us move to the exact calculation, so certain estimations of international trade, especially the theories on international trade which derives the differences in absolute cost advantages by which trade is possible. So, Adam Smith, as we all know, the father of economics, because of many systematic conceptualization of foundation of economics. And in fact, mercantilism usually not referred in the context of international trade theories, because of the fact that they do not have any systematic record, systematic argument, no scientific argument behind their claim. So, therefore, Adam Smith, the next contributor to economic theories, has actually explained things in a very robust and strong manner. Now, they are the people we are going to talk about in this class or in this hour. Smith, Adam Smith is the first person in the picture, David Ricardo and Malthus. Malthus is also referred only because he used to emphasize his contribution is majorly in the area of population, demography, and where a famous concept given by Malthus, the geometric progression versus arithmetic progression. The population will grow as per his view, population will grow at geometric progression, whereas the growth of the country, that is GDP, will grow at an arithmetic progression. Though largely that is based on a situation of the European economy, but later on their views are actually again rejected by the empirical estimations of different countries. Especially in developing countries, this theory is not that applicable if the developing countries actually encase the demographic dividend out of it. Now, again what I wanted to say are the following in this set of lectures, especially on broad overview of theories, where we are supposed to understand absolute cost advantage. Mercantilism we have already dealt with, where we emphasize William Petty and Thomas More, and Adam Smith contributed absolute cost advantage theory. So, we are explaining cost advantage theory in detail. Similarly, comparative cost advantage theory by David Ricardo, and as per the modern theories are concerned, they emphasize on resources and its role on trade. They also talked about specific factors and their distribution of income after trade, especially by Samuelson and Jones. There are also standard trade models based on specialization and economy of scale by Krugman or Ostfeld. And the competitive advantage model was actually propagated or suggested by Michael Porter, who is very famous for the understanding of competition. Now, let us understand the details of Adam Smith theory as a foundation to international trade discussion, international trade strategies. So, we are referring to the period 1723 to 1719, where as we all know Adam Smith, he was a professor at University of Glasgow, Scotland, and he was also a chair in 1751. These are all background for understanding of who is Adam Smith, why he is called the father of economics. 1752 transferred to the chair of philosophy, and on his travel to France, he was also influenced by the writings of Physiocrates. 1776 a theory of moral sentiments and an inquiry into the nature of causes of wealth of nations was published. So, this is the period where the book, the masterpiece of his was actually published, and from that year onwards Adam Smith has been on limelight or was on limelight and referred in the discussions of economic theories. So, vehement attack he made vehement attack on mercantilists because of their propositions which are actually against trade. So, this is the book we are referring to. We are referring to this book, Wealth of Nation. The original piece is here and later on revised into different versions. Different editions are actually made available by different experts, interpreted by different people. Adam Smith attack on mercantilism because of certain the following matters, especially political arguments were not an economic one. They are majorly based on mercantilism views are majorly restricted to political views, and part of the argument was for new economic policy. Why how has counteracted the mercantilism. Then he argued that the basic unit for social analysis should be nation, not the state. As we have already said that mercantilism principles were based on statehood or the nationalism concept, but the nation and the people how they are benefited in the long run or sustainably have not been discussed in detail. So, he was against the belief that it was of zero sum game. So, zero sum game. So, what do you mean by zero sum game? This means that someone's gain at the cost of another's loss. So, this is not true in later part of theories. They say it is positive sum game, no question of zero sum, all can grow together. So, both nations gained. So, what are the capitalist principles by which we are discussing the theories? The capitalist principles largely based on value additions through goods and services produced and usually for a profitable exchange. And human labor is a power of labor power is a commodity for sale. So, labor is the source of value. Throughout the classical economists and their views are largely based on labor. I mean values are expressed in labor units. Only because of the fact that other factors are not explored and the market value of other factors are not presented in detail during that time. Only laborer and their contributions are expressed. Even laborer were not exactly expressed by their market value. And you might have heard about bonded labor. Largely they are actually even bonded labor are imported, exported and or taken freely from developing country, largely Indian continent and sold in American or other parts of the world. So, what we try to say how basic capitalist principles work. There are different units of production, units of consumption where the cycle bridges the gap. The businesses units actually provides goods and services. In lieu, the households or the units of consumption, I mean another units of the cycle is the household, they provide consumption and consumption spending of the goods and services, and here the households provide the consumption spending. So, therefore, whatever the products are produced in the business units are actually solved by the households. Similarly, whatever the requirements of the business units is labor and investment, it is provided by laborers I mean the households in terms of laborers and in terms of investments. Their savings are actually channelized through investments. So, and accordingly wages are actually paid by the business units to the households, and that were again which kind of wages are paid equivalent to the labor hours they spend. And even largely capitalist economy emerged because of the fact that there are some kind of shadow labor wages. These wages are not paid as per the contribution made by the household to the businessman to the business units. So, therefore, the capitalist growth were actually observed during that period. Some other basic principles by which classical economists developed, especially Adam Smith developed his theory, is also largely based on invisible hands of the market. So, it is we need not worry about the government to intervene only because of the fact that things are automatically solved, and these are again based on some other classical economists view like J.B. Say, it is also called Say's laws of market, Say's law of market, which says that every supply creates its own demand. So, the Queen's government used to receive these suggestions from the experts from the classical economists that you need not worry so much to intervene to the units of our market, because market will automatically function and correct the mismatch. How do we survive in a world where we must depend on many others, where humans are by nature self-interested individuals? So, how do we survive in a world where we must depend on many others, whereas actually individuals or the humans are actually highly self-centric or self-interested. So, it seems as if there are some sort of conflict of interest arrives so far as we are mixing or exchanging one set of production units and outputs to another one, because of the fact that the self satiated persons or the self interested persons might derive might go for a self centric behavior, which will result in confusions. But the solution lies with the market only because the free market, while appearing chaotic on restraint, is actually guided to produce the right amount and variety of goods by a so called invisible hand. So, the invisible hand is here if there is any kind of mismatch or imbalances, it will save, because whatever is produced, whatever is supplied automatically demanded. Why demanded? Supply equal to demand only because those producing units will actually generate two things, goods and services, or especially goods. Then also those supplying units, whatever the goods are actually generated, they also generate income in terms of wages. So, those wages are part of the income of the households. So, these are the income of the households. So, these incomes are actually demanded, these incomes are useful to demand the goods produced by the supply units. So, therefore, whatever the products produced in a unit, equivalent to that amount of income is generated and income is transferred to the factors of productions, and the factors of productions utilize their income for purchasing the goods and services. Therefore, the economy is correcting eventually, but these problems are not observed during that period, at least for 200 years, where the classical economy and their classical economist view and their views are actually continued for a long period. What happens over the time, a person whoever is earning money, they have a tendency to save certain portion of their income. So, saving is a leakage to the system. So, saving whatever is there, we are taking a saving. Saving is a leakage, that gets saved, that does not derive immediate demand. So, perpetually it gets different in the long run. So, it gets perpetuated over a long run, and what really happens in the long run, that amount becomes, that leakage becomes very huge. Initially what happens, it reduce the total demand won't be there of that much. In the next time, the supplier will cut short their production since total demand is not there. So, therefore, again less income is generated. So, less income, then further less demand, then further less demand, then further less production. So, the economy eventually proceeds or economy proceeding towards a recession, which was actually observed in 1930s. So, we will discuss in some other lecture, but this is the mechanism where classical largely believe that actually there will be no problem, and whatever is the income generated in the economy, that will be demanding the products of the producing units. So, therefore, the market mechanism is self regulating. So, this is their belief, and similarly individuals seeking success are driven by self interest profit motive. So, it is based on law of supply and demand. So, largely this is the equilibrium followed in this diagram with the basic demand and supply. If there will be any shortage, as I already said, the price will rise and the demand falls. So, accordingly if there will be surplus, price falls and the equilibrium gets maintained. So, it is the automatic rule which governs the equilibrium. So, they also believe on law of competition. The competitive market system compels producers to be increasingly efficient and to respond to the desires of the consumers. A social division of labor will maximize the satisfaction of individual wants and needs given the scarce resources. Government should interfere minimally, as we have already said, and as less as possible, because of the fact that the market gets corrected automatically. So, they believe the economy must function automatically, and so let the economy be free. So, they propose during that time that leave things alone, that is called laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is the word coined by Adam Smith. So, therefore, what are the questions left? So, given all those assumptions and basic premises of the classical economist, so we are supposed to understand what and what is the basis for trade, what, why and for whom. There are three questions we generally pose: what, why and for whom. So, in this context we are supposed to know what is the basis for trade, what are the gains from trade and what are the patterns of trade in the classical economist. So, accordingly some strategies are developed. The assumptions are largely two countries, country A may be US and India, and two goods, let it be commodity X and Y, apple and cloth and wine is the standard example, cloth and wine, and one stands for one factor of production, that is labor units. So, this is the first assumption they made it, and the market must be competitive. There should not be any kind of imperfect competition in determining the prices of the factors and prices of the products. So, price should not be actually scheduled by any other reason. So, therefore, whatever market must be completely free. So, market must actually give the best solutions to the products and the factors. So, zero transportation cost was also assumed to understand that there should not be any interference while we are discussing the theory of international trade, though that is not a realistic assumption. So, Adam Smith theory is actually based on absolute cost advantage. I have said in the original proposition was on absolute cost differences, and the absolute cost advantage or advantage model which they suggest is the following: that when one nation has absolute advantage in production of one commodity, but an absolute disadvantage with respect to other nation in a second commodity, both nations can gain by specializing their absolute advantage goods and exchanging part of the output of the commodity of its absolute disadvantage. What do you mean by that? This suggests that the country which has absolute advantage in certain products or one product, the country must specialize in that particular product, and the disadvantaged product must be produced in another country. So, therefore, there will be quid pro quo and trade is possible. For example, Canada is efficient in growing wheat and inefficient in growing bananas. So, these are disadvantage in the product banana, whereas they have advantage in terms of cost for wheat. So, Canada must specialize in the production of wheat. Similarly, Nicaragua is efficient in growing bananas and inefficient in growing wheat. So, therefore, between these two countries there must be trade. One will be specializing wheat, another will be specializing bananas. Canada has absolute advantage in wheat, as I just said, and Nicaragua has absolute advantage in banana. So, mutual beneficial trade can take place if both countries specialize in absolute advantage. So, specialization in trade advantage for both the countries, and the views are largely based on laissez-faire. Therefore, there is no government intervention and the specialization is possible. So, they will utilize at the best manner they can, and now to check very carefully of the absolute advantage, let us assume there are two countries, US and India, how they are going to trade and what is trade and what are the direction of trade, what products they are going to produce or specialize, and how much benefits they will derive out of trade. We must actually try to understand very clearly. Now, wheat, let us interpret there are two countries, two products or two goods and one factor. Here one factor is labor. Now, wheat is expressed here as bushels per labor hour. That means, here we express the wheat here as productivity. Similarly, cloth, yards per labor hour, how much labor hour, how much yards can be produced per unit of labor hour. So, 6, 4, 1, 5, these are the productivities. In two countries. So, therefore, straightway if you just try to count 6 units of 6 units of bushels of wheat, or 6 units of wheat can be produced in US, as against only 1 unit of wheat can be produced in India. So, therefore, US has absolute advantage in terms of production. Now, if you compare cloth, 4 units of cloth or 4 yards of cloth at maximum by utilizing their resources in US is possible, whereas India has advantage in producing more than that of US. So, therefore, in US will specialize in the production of wheat, whereas India will specialize in the production of cloth, and there will be mutual mutual trade possible. So, this is purely based on absolute cost advantage. Here we are expressing in terms of absolute productivity advantage. Now, these things can be also expressed in terms of cost. So, per unit of cost, how we can do it? Per unit of labor, how much output can be produced. So, this is productivity. If you express in terms of per unit of wheat, how much per unit of wheat, how much labor is required, how much labor units or labor hours are required to produce per unit of wheat, per unit of wheat. So, it will be simply, that means 6 units of wheat are produced by 1 unit of labor. So, 1 unit of wheat can be produced by 1/6 of labor. So, 1/6 of labor can able to produce 1 unit of wheat in US, whereas 1:1 in India. This is India. So, therefore, it is very expensive to produce wheat in India, so far as cost advantage is concerned. Now, these are, if we can express 1/6, then 1 upon 1, then 1/4, 1/5, we can compare the cost as well. Now, based on this logic, US has absolute advantage over India in wheat, which I already said, and India has absolute advantage over US in cloth. So, therefore, both nations can gain from their specialization. And what kind of gain? Because if one will be producing more, that country will export to another country, and in lieu another country will get the rest from other country. So, that means US will export 6 units to India, and in India can able to export more than that of what US can able to produce. So, therefore, the absolute cost difference results in deriving more benefit. So, therefore, trade is possible. In this context, what I wanted to say that 6 units versus 5 units. Now, what is the mutual trade possible? Mutual trade possible. Now, how much at maximum maximum mutual trade? For example, at maximum US expects from US expects from India at least 4 units of cloth. Okay. So, I am now just explaining mutual benefits after trade, or the minimum expectation from other countries, how a country is expecting from another country as the minimum one. So, in order to have trade, US expect that 4 units of cloth must be actually imported or must be received from India. So, 4 units of cloth are actually received by US from India as a minimum requirement at least. Then in lieu, if 4 units are received, 4 units of cloth are received by US, then how much for that, how much amount of wheat US is ready to export, that is 6 units. Okay. So, 6 units of wheat US is ready to export because US has received 4 units of cloth. Now, if 6 units are actually exported to India, now India to produce 6 units of wheat, India can save 6 labor units because 1 unit of labor can at maximum produce 1 unit of wheat. So, since 6 units are received, 6 units of wheats are received to India, so India can save 6 units of labor or 6 hours of labor. If that 6 hours of labors are actually used for the production of cloth, so 1 unit of labor hour can produce 5. So, 6 units of labor can produce 6 into 5, that is 30. So, 30 units of cloth can be produced in India with the trade. So, therefore, mutual beneficial trade is presented in this box. 4C is at least less than equal to 6W is less than equal to 30 units of cloth. So, both the countries will be actually benefiting their trade with their interaction. So, so these are all how Adam Smith explained absolute cost advantage. We can interpret in various other ways as well. So, in the next class we will carry forward with relative cost advantage with production possibility frontier. We will also explain mutual beneficial trade and the range of trade. This is also called range of trade, which we have just explained, and accordingly we can criticize Adam Smith theory in detail. Now, we will carry forward to the next class. With this, let me close here. We will discuss rest of the things in detail in the next class. Thank you.